The right are infighting again. Is anything new? 2023 is truly the year of the right-wing purity spiral into oblivion, it seems. Oh well. What is it this time, though? Basically, it's over how we should treat the transgenders. Should they be allowed in the movement? Or should we bully them out of existence? Should we try to prove the science is far from settled and move the institutions? Should we accept the gays? Or should we banish them back to Narnia in the closet? Now listen, I have friends who are part of the alphabet community, who I love very much, very dearly, not even being ironic right now, and I would not like to see them thrown into gulags. Let's just get that straight. But also, some of the outrage that is driving this debate on how angry we should be is completely understandable to me. I personally have friends and family who have been impacted by the callous and careless ideology that affirms endlessly will speedily send you down the path of cutting your genitals off, all to abandon you when you realize you may have made the wrong decision. There are too many stories of families that have been torn apart by this stuff or hurt drastically just on virtue of our conversations around these issues being so militantly censored. Any questions being proposed that may be quite healthy in reality getting framed as bigotry. So understandably, you fight back. You declare war against the enemy. But what does war actually mean on the internet? Most people seem to think it is shaming these individuals out of existence, mocking any trans person on TikTok, mocking and bullying this ideology until it disappears into the shadows. But is this really the right way to go? Personally, I think there are some very serious, moral, and tactical questions to be answered there. But before we get into it, I wanted to say a massive thank you to today's sponsor, Noble Gold. We are at war, and we are in a recession. Two things the government does not want you to know or think about, but it's only a matter of time until the cracks start to show. And do you know who will get hit the hardest? You. Fortunately, Noble Gold Investments is here to help. You have worked too hard to build up your savings to see it all crushed to bits in the financial fallout of government's poor decisions leading to wars, inflation, and the sanctions that are bound to happen. Gold and silver from Noble Gold Investments are real possessions in times like these. Knowing that you are outside the system when it all goes wrong is a great feeling. Noble Gold Investments has been helping people like you to keep their money safe for years with precious metal IRAs. And this month, they're giving away a beautiful Gold Eagle bullion coin with every qualifying IRA of $50,000 or higher. Make sure you don't get trampled in this next economic disaster. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire is probably the best example when it comes to conservatives getting aggressive when dealing with the trans issue. Walsh regularly hits out against trans people like Dylan Mulvaney and uses rather harsh words when dealing with them, which has led to some criticism even from those who do see a problem with modern transgender ideology.
I suppose one thing that I've maybe will find disagreement on is Dylan Mulvaney. You went viral not long ago with a video, well, I would say attacking him, but you might disagree with that.
Sure, you can say that.
And I want to challenge you on this because you say things like that he is a lifeless, unearthly, and eerie, and a kind of human deep fake. And you've also sort of doubled down and said that if you're the sort of person who thinks this is mean, then you yourself are part of the problem. In that case, I'm part of the problem, because I do think that this is unnecessarily ad hominem, or the attack on him was unnecessarily ad hominem. And so I wanted to sort of understand why I'm part of the problem for thinking that you might have gone too far with Dylan.
Well, the first question I have to ask you is, do you think I'm wrong? What I said is wrong?
Yes.
Which part of it?
Because when I see Dylan Mulvaney, I see a temple of God. I see that he is loved by Christ and that he is possibly unwell and certainly being misguided by people around him. And so I feel it makes me sad when I see that character. I see him. I don't think he's unearthly. On the contrary, I see him as precious. Just it's in a, I mean, this might sort of be. I guess people might think it's condescending of me to think, but I sort of feel a bit sad for him.
Caring about human dignity is a very fair point. But you know me, I'm just an evil, bigoted female online, so what does this matter to me? I'm kidding, of course, but perhaps a more precise point is, does this actually even work? I think James Lindsay had an interesting take when discussing Walsh's tactics in a thread on Twitter. The woke ideology is female. You can't respond to it with toxic masculine strength. That's punching a woman in the face. Matt does great, then says stuff like, "You wanted this fight, so now you have it." That's not how you deal with a hysterical woman. That's for an aggressive man. I can't say I'm a fan of my entire gender being used to describe insane ideologies, but we'll let it slide this time, James, lest I be called a hysterical female. He goes on, "Woke advances by summoning demons that barely exist so it can defeat them. When Matt and other reactionaries step into the aggressive man versus man posture, they become the left's demon and thus help them." I, for one, know mockery and condemnation of myself has not once gotten me to change my political beliefs. I have been banned from countries. I have been called every name in the book, publicly shamed to the high heavens, and certainly in my most vigilant activist days, this did not only deter me, it made me dig my heels in even further and drummed up even more support for my cause. It's interesting how we very quickly forget that the era of 2016 right-wing activism was almost entirely prompted and fanned into flame by endless censorship attempts, attacks, shaming, and mob cancellation.
Lawrence Southern, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay! Lawrence Southern, go away!
And the people who fanned those flames used a lot of the same arguments we hear on the right today. This can no longer wait. You either actively fight, stand with us against fascism, or you are complicit. All saying this drastic behavior was necessary due to urgency, on top of kicking anyone who wasn't completely on their side out of their movement, dwindling it smaller and smaller while making the other side even bigger, not realizing all of this behavior was completely making every right-wing activist giddy with joy for the clicks they were about to get and all of the new support coming over. I really don't think things would have worked out so well for my career if Antifa or protesters showed up to my street interviews with books on second-wave feminism and said into the mic, "Hey, I know you're still trying to figure out this political world, but here's some literature I'm interested in, and it helped me on my journey. I may not be the most articulate, but this cause means a lot to me, and I appreciate that you're curious about it and coming out to see what it's about, even if you haven't quite bought in." I literally would have no career if people acted this reasonably at their protests or online. I can almost guarantee you the refresh of Sam Smith's ridiculous Spirit of Halloween tier Satanist costume party at the Grammys was entirely spawned from a marketing campaign knowing full well conservatives in America would ensure it was trending all over Twitter through their outrage. They shuffled the desperate for attention deck and came up with, we haven't used the satanic panic in about 30 years. Suppose we can pull this one out and try it again, dust it off, right? And, I really do wonder, just setting aside the question of morality, which I think it is immoral to bully people, when it comes to tactics, if the idea of publicly and repeatedly shaming trans ideologues will also have the same effect for their activism that it did for right-wing activism back in the day. Will they use it to boost their own profiles? Or will the public opinion be steered in the direction of banishing this ideology out of popular culture and public life? Well, let's look at the data on shaming, because I think a lot of people have some misconceptions about this. One of the most interesting public social campaigns of public shaming was during the pandemic, where studies now show the shaming campaigns actually made things worse because, just on a medical level, people were simply more likely to hide or lie about their COVID for their own benefits, therefore spreading it more. They They didn't care about the shaming, they just didn't want their life to be impeded by these psycho, control freaks, quite frankly. So the way in which shaming is introduced really depends on the scenario, and sometimes if introduced at the wrong time can make everything worse. Now, just on a social level, what this shaming during the COVID era did to people's perception of these shamers, the government, that was a really interesting result as well. The general gist of this article is that after public humiliation in an attempt to get people to adhere to a certain political belief, in this case, the COVID narrative, vaccination, social distancing, government lockdown, etc., this just led to people being significantly more opposed and angry at those shaming them. Individuals' small and big injustices, breach of trust, and humiliation associated with helplessness evocate embitterment. Embitterment can explain aggressive and dysfunctional behavior. Embitterment is an emotion which no longer asks for solutions, but for compensation by revenge. I've met a lot of people from a lot of different political backgrounds in my life and liked a lot of them. And believe it or not, the left are actually pretty damn similar to us. They tick the same way we do, just under a different algorithm of information. So when, let's say, you're a 15-year-old kid struggling with their gender identity and you post a silly little TikTok about your beliefs, and then you get plastered all over right-wing Twitter, how do you think that's going to make you feel? Well, if this were back in the 90s and you got publicly shamed for being a weirdo, maybe you'd snap out of it because nobody is going to tell you that having frog self pronouns is completely normal. But now there is an entire corner of the internet that will have your back. You have a support network that will completely entrench you into your behavior. And you're certainly not going to run to the other side that have just called you a swath of every name in the book, right? I have a lot of sympathy for the broken teenage weirdos of the world, considering there is like a 99% chance I would have no tits right now if I were born only 5 years later. I was a hardcore tomboy, played a bunch of sports. I even briefly got interested in cross-dressing myself due to being born in the Tumblr era and going to tons of cosplay conventions. A lot of adults pretend to have this moral superiority to the younger, more woke generations simply because they had the privilege of not growing up in the culture and schooling systems that both they and the other adults in their generation broke. The parents who are out here being concerned about all this trans business, they may as well have fallen into the same ideologies if they were born later. We're all human after all, and we're all susceptible to our environments. This didn't suddenly spawn out of the heads of these teenagers, right? But let's now rewind a bit, and let's go back to that clip of Matt Walsh that I played for you earlier and add a bit more context to change this conversation around.
It was sad, but if let's say you think that the video or the display is itself threatening, then you can criticize the video and the display. But it seemed to me that it was actually his very existence that you were challenging. And do you think
it's not his existence, it's what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's what he's choosing to do that I'm challenging. You said that he's being manipulated, right? I think that's what you said.
Yes. Well, I said, I imagine he's being misguided by people.
Misguided. Maybe, maybe not.
I don't know.
But what I do know is that he is misguiding other people. Okay, so what got him to this state, I'm not sure exactly. But he is manipulating and misguiding. He is now a proponent of this thing. Mm-hmm. So he's not just Dylan Mulvaney. He now wants to recruit other people to be Dylan Mulvaney. Okay, he wants to do that with my kids and anyone else's kids. That's why he's at the White House shilling for gender-affirming care for minors, which is, in other words, mutilating and castrating children. So once you do that, you're engaging in politics, you're a public figure, you are now a representative of this idea. That also gives me even more, I believe, moral license to be brutally honest with you.
Matt actually does have a point here. You may be shocked to hear me say this, given how I seem to have been railing against shaming this entire video, and that's because all of this is far more complex than it seems, just like the rest of life. Nobody likes that answer, but it's true. There's a lot more gray than black and white. But when we talk about the transgender issue, what we're really doing is lumping two very different types of people together. One are the institutions pushing this, and the rest, the vast majority of those who call themselves transgender right now, I mean, a lot of them are pretty young. They're the kids who in the 2000s would have been a scene kid going raw XD on internet message boards, and who in the 80s would have been raving to goth music after painting their face to look like Kiss. They are the outcasts, a lot of whom are autistic, who are just trying to figure themselves out. And some have been unwittingly groomed into a subculture that never would have interested them naturally. And of course, I'm sure there are those who are like Buck Angel, who this genuinely is just the life that they really, really wanted. I love the outcasts, I love the goths, I love the scene kids, and I have a lot of love for the people now that are getting involved in this transgender stuff. But the problem is, being trans, unlike being goth, ends up in some pretty irreversible, life-changing medical impacts. So we can't just leave it alone, allow kids to experiment to their heart's content here with no boundaries. There has to be some pushback, some questions asked, some wake-up calls to the problems that do exist, but also care and compassion for those who you very well could have been if born in a different era. But as Matt says, Dylan Mulvaney is not just one lonely teenager struggling to find meaning or discover themselves. Dylan is a part and a leader of a political movement that is pushing others to follow its path. Maggie Anders of the FEE pointed out that former woke people like her and, people still in that crowd, a lot of women, they may not respond well to the bullying of random trans people online. And it's far more effective to appeal to the sense of justice, like pointing out that people are coming after kids and others are erasing womanhood. I agree. It's institutions using poor research, pushing unnecessary gender ideology on children, and those who advocate for violence against their detractors like the Kill TERFs people who need to be shamed for their actions, not who they are. Because if we're being honest, if Dylan just dressed up like a woman at home or in private life, would you really care? It would be different, but it wouldn't be damaging to society at large, unlike shilling for putting underage children on hormones. It's not just Dylan, though, of course. You see the myriad of cases where men change their gender right after they've raped and murdered people just to be put in a woman's prison. Nobody with a sense of justice, left or right, could honestly object to calling these criminals scum. But because they're all trans, all of this whole wide umbrella, right? It all gets lumped into some bucket. The trans murderer that wants to go to a woman's prison with Kai, 14, who spends too much time on their iPhone. These are not the same people. And those who profit off of mutilating children, both physically and chemically, those who usher kids into surgeries after just 1 month or less of counseling, like what happened to Sarah, who I interviewed on this channel, those are the people we should be pointing our attacks in the direction of. We have to be careful to separate the activists and the institutions involved in all of this, who are rightly deserving of harsh criticism and attacks, and those who need to be treated with love and compassion, who could easily be going through the most difficult, confusing time of their life, and will be pushed further away from any sort of different perspective you may have to offer when you discount their humanity. So in conclusion, does shaming and being cruel online work? Yes and no. Just like all tools, shame has its time and its place, but when all you have is a hammer, everything will seem like a nail. And when all you see are abusers and not victims, then everyone will need to be shamed.